Well, it's clear he's looking for a way out, but he hasn't quite found it yet. I think that's why we have this really monstrous 8 p.m. deadline tonight, where President Trump has said if Iran doesn't come to the table for negotiations, doesn't reopen the Strait of Hormuz by 8 p.m. Eastern tonight, he's going to bomb them back into the Stone Ages. He's threatened a new infrastructure day that takes on power plants and bridges. Some would say that these could constitute war crimes. But he's looking for a way to de-escalate this conflict because he entered into it with no plan and no strategy, and now is having trouble finding a way out. So my expectation is he's hoping to bridge the gap between what are two very maximalist set of demands that both sides have put on the table in negotiations and try to really open a diplomatic path that helps at least get to a ceasefire that puts a pause on this conflict and takes some pressure off the markets.
Rebecca, it seems, for a lot of us that probably aren't that familiar with this part of the world, we now understand how important the Strait of Hormuz is for global oil trade, as well as just global trade in general. Is there a solution here you have to have Iran basically blessing the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, don't you?
That's exactly right. I think that this war has let a very dangerous genie out of the bottle, right? Iran now knows that with pretty minimal effort, it can close the Strait of Hormuz, and that effectively the world will tolerate it doing so. So I am very skeptical that we will return to anything that resembles the status quo ante in the Strait of Hormuz. I think we've entered a new normal. What I think is the most likely outcome, looking at these reports that Iran and Oman are now talking about creating some sort of framework for reopening the strait, is that
Right.
Iran, in the context of negotiations, probably does agree to reopen the strait to transit, but they do so within a tolling
Right.
system, that there's a toll that's probably split between Iran and Oman, which of course is the country on the other side of the strait from Iran, and that Iran justifies this by saying it's using its portion of the tolls
Right.
reconstruction after the war.
I want to give some insight here, folks. Rebecca's written a blistering essay on realism. And this, of course, goes back Advent, John Quincy Adams, and runs through all of the modern, pragmatic, realistic effort, maybe codified by John Mearsheimer in Chicago right now. Rebecca, what is the strategy? Obviously, realism is what they're going to say at the White House, or is it just a busted theory that Henry Kissinger wouldn't recognize?
So the Trump administration has tried to paint itself as realist, as clear-eyed, as pragmatic,
Yeah.
as meeting the world as it is, right? Not trying to transform it in some idealistic fashion. But the problem is that realists, properly understood, the real realism would dictate a clear focus on the national interest and also a clear focus on great power competition. It would advise against regime change wars and getting further bogged down in the Middle East, which is a region that President Trump himself has said in his own strategy documents shouldn't be a top priority for the United States. So the problem is that this war really goes against all of the counsel that realism would offer. And that's part of why we're so stuck. But it's also part of why this war is putting the United States at a global strategic deficit. Because by further bogging us down in the Middle East and expending all kinds of US munitions and military material in this war with Iran, we're by the day becoming less and less prepared for any future conflict with China, and maybe even making it more likely.
Rebecca, the U.S. entered into this war with little to no consultation with our traditional allies. What's the repercussions there, do you think?
NATO's in dire straits, and we even saw the president say yesterday, once again, that he was thinking about saying, quote, bye-bye to NATO. And as I've written elsewhere, I think we're in a position now where NATO has become a zombie alliance. It continues to exist on paper. There are bureaucrats and military officials that meet in Brussels. But who now really believes that President Trump would come to the defense of a NATO ally if attacked? It's a grave situation. It's certainly not what I would have hoped to see. But I do think that coming on the heels of the Greenland crisis, and then now with Trump calling on allies to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz and them largely declining to do so, we're in a very tough situation.
Rebecca, I got a minute and a half at best. What do you want from Secretary Rubio?
Secretary Rubio has a very important role to play in his dual-hatted National Security Advisor, Secretary of State role. And what I hope to see from him, frankly, is moderation of some of the president's worst instincts. the recent reports coming out of the White House suggest that President Trump is quote unquote bloodthirsty, that he's now become the voice calling for escalation. I hope that Secretary Rubio could be a voice of caution and a voice of reason as the United States tries to find a way out of here. And in particular, I think Secretary Rubio has been rightly focused this whole time throughout this administration on trying to get China policy right. He hasn't always had the power to shape it, but especially as we have the convergence of this war plus the president's trip to Beijing in mid-May, I hope that Secretary Rubio can keep our China policy on track.
We have to run, Rebecca. Don't be a stranger. Congratulations on the impact you're having at the Council on Foreign Relations.